Hello everybody, thanks for joining us for today's CyberHawks Cyber Challenge practice session. Today we're going to be talking about different logging mechanisms. Some of them are going to be available to you during the Cyber Challenge, and other ones might be good for you in your future job or during other different cybersecurity competitions. Generally speaking, most incident response strategies will rely on having some form of central logging service to identify the source of different data breaches. Today we're going to go over 3 different tools. They're going to have varying different degrees of complexity, and the most basic of those is going to be Wireshark. So that's a network monitoring tool, and it was primarily built and used for debugging purposes. Because it logs most of the activity that comes in and out of your network, you can use it as a very rudimentary tool to identify different security breaches. Next, on the next level would be something like Snort. And Snort is a free open source intrusion detection system or intrusion prevention system, depending on how you set it up. And what that means is that not only does it log and monitor your network traffic, but it can also take more active measures. It'll flag different things for you. It'll set alerts. And then in some cases, it can drop packets that violate its rule set. And then finally, we have Splunk. Unfortunately, since most of those services are paid services, we aren't going to use those for the purposes of the competition. But it is a security information and event management system. So they rely on their expertise in cybersecurity to take all of that big data or that large amounts of data that your system is going to generate in order to generate these logs for you and create alerts and things of that nature. So that's what we're going to focus on today is these 3, and we're going to show you Wireshark and Snort. So the first tool that we're going to look at today is going to be Wireshark. It's a free open source packet analyzer that was developed for network debugging purposes, but in some instances it does have a cybersecurity logging purpose. It provides filters and some limited flagging capabilities in a GUI display. And importantly, it does not have any specific IDS or IPS services, and they make that pretty clear when you install it. And it should not be used as the sole network defense tool. In a few cybersecurity competitions, they have asked us to install Wireshark and then collect a few different packet information from it. And I do know that the NCL, or National Cyber League, does use some form of using Wireshark in order to analyze some packets that they provide. It uses PCAP for capturing network packets, which is a low-level API for capturing network traffic. And then if you ever need to use it on Windows, you'll need to install WinPCAP as well, but it should be part of the installation process. So here we have the Windows 2012 server that we're going to be using for the Cyber Challenge. And we're going to be displaying a little bit in terms of some of the uses and some of the tools that are available to you through Wireshark. So for those of you that have never installed or used Wireshark before, it's a very easy installation process. You'll just go to their website and then download a .exe file, and it should take you pretty simply through all the steps that you're going to need in terms of installing it. Now to run it, all you really need to do is go ahead and open up your search bar and then look for Wireshark. So it should automatically populate for you, and here is Wireshark. It's a graphical user display, and it'll allow me to select between which network adapter I'm going to be using to capture the data that's traveling through it. So if I go ahead and select Ethernet 0, we see that it's already begun to kind of capture all that information. It'll do this very quickly, so there's different ways. So for instance, I can go ahead and pause it and then go back and view it. That's one of the main drawbacks for it. So if you're ever doing some kind of cybersecurity strategy with Wireshark in it, primarily that'll just be like we've exhausted all the other options, so we're going to need to just manually go through all these logs. And as you can see, there's a lot to take in here. And it captures a very large variety of different packet information. So we have a whole bunch of UDP, TCP, TLS, a lot of different information here. Now, since we're running this through a VPN, what we'll notice is that a lot of this has very similar source and destination. So at the one at the top here, the source is .105 and the destination is .234. 105 is this machine here, and 234 is the VPN server. So we'll see that a majority of the packets that are being transferred are going to be to or from those two sources. So if I go ahead and start it up again, we'll go ahead and start capturing all that data. One of the major uses of it is going to be this data filter. So for instance, if I only want to see UDP packets, I'll go ahead and apply that filter. And that could be useful for, say, I'm running an HTTP service and I need to see if it's properly, if the proper acknowledgement or the for the different kinds of errors are properly propagating. I would use that. And there's a whole bunch of other different ways that you can kind of use that. So other than that, one other major feature is going to be here. It told me unsaved packets. Do you want to save the captured packets? So one thing I can do is that periodically I can go ahead and I can save this. So in this instance, I'm going to Wireshark PCAP1. You can choose between a variety of different save options. I'm going to end up saving it as a PCAP file, and we'll show that when we're using Snort, that we can actually go ahead and pop that open again and take a look at that using Snort, which would be a different service. There are many other different ways that you can use this. I know if you export that into another file, you could use, there's different Linux command line tools that I've seen people try and use to help sort through and find different information to different triggers that aren't super easy to use using these filters or this search bar. So there's a whole bunch of different ways that we could use this. But I just kind of wanted to introduce just the general structure of kind of what Wireshark does, show you guys a little bit of it, but there are certainly many more in-depth ways that you can use this, that you can get a lot more mileage out of it than just what I showed today. So the next tool that we're going to take a look at is known as Snort, and that is a free open source intrusion detection system / intrusion prevention system, depending on how you set it up. It monitors network traffic and provides 3 services: packet sniffing, packet logging, and then can be used again as a full network intrusion prevention system. It uses different sets of rules in order to determine whether it triggers these alerts. And also under these rules, it can also take what's known as block actions, which is blocking, dropping, or rejecting traffic that falls within those rule sets. So here we are back in the Windows 2012 server, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at Snort. I've gone ahead and installed it on this server, so if anyone would like to go ahead and give it a shot, you can follow some of the steps that I've given here to see kind of what output that you get on your side, and hopefully kind of see how this runs. Regarding the installation process, there's a few different ways that you can do it. You can do it on a variety of different systems. For me, Windows was the easiest to install on since it gave you a .exe file. One thing I noticed was that not only did you need to have that exe file, which I've got here, but I also needed to install WinPCAP. And I noted that for the Wireshark, is that Wireshark on Windows systems uses WinPCAP. Well, this does as well. So you'll need to make sure to go and collect that as well. And as I said, I'll provide a link in terms of a tutorial that I found fairly easy and straightforward to use for getting your Snort to run on your Windows system. Linux, it's a different story. From what I've seen, it looks like you'll need to install that from source. So it can be a little bit more challenging, especially if you're a little bit nervous about using some of those command line tools. So without further ado, in terms of running Snort on this machine, I've gone ahead and I've installed it in the snort/bin directory. And in order to run it, all I really need to do is do Snort, and then it'll run. So you can see that it's initialized Snort. It uses a data acquisition unit, or DAC, when collecting those PCAPs. And then we'll see that it's running here. Now, unfortunately, the defaults for this one, and there's multiple different interfaces that you can choose from. Unfortunately, the default on this one isn't actually connected to anything. So if we go ahead and take a look, we've received no packets, we've dropped no packets, we've filtered no packets. So in order to fix that, and this might be useful if you run into a similar problem, is that it's going to be snort dash capital W. And we say we have two options here. So if I go ahead and do snort dash I2, because 2 is going to be the one where most of the traffic is going to go through, we go ahead and we start seeing a whole bunch of data starting to come in. And it was kind of similar to how with that Wireshark, we had just a flood of information. Well, we're getting that flood of information on this side too. So if I go ahead and stop it with a Control C, now we start to see all the data that we pulled in. So if we go ahead and take a look at it, we received 323 and analyzed only this amount. So only 305 of them were analyzed. It tells us kind of where the sources were. So Ethernet picked up 305, which is coincidentally 100% of them. Gives us a breakdown, UDP versus TCP, 173 to 10. And some different services and things of that nature. Some bad checksums and things like that. We can use a few different options. So snort negative I, 2 and negative VTE. This one was one that they used quite frequently, and it basically now kind of like how similar with Wireshark, where we're able to view into each of those packets. We can do that now using snort. And so I let that run a little bit longer. Now, like how I noted with Wireshark, where most of the packets are going to be between the Windows 2012 machine and the VPN server, it's a very similar situation. So in this case that I've got right here, the source is 234 and the destination is 105, which is this machine. One thing that you'll notice, I've got these warnings here. No preprocessors configured. So if I just run with snort dash I2, I've actually not linked it to any kind of configuration file, and I'll show that in a minute. But basically, that's what loads in our rule sets for how to deal with packets that are coming in. But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and show. So for instance, if I want to use this for later, I'm going to go ahead and I can do a very similar I2, and just with a -L, I can go ahead and select which directory I'm going to save my logs in. So if I go ahead and take a look at where snort is in my bin, I've got a file there that I created called logs. I already have a few of them in here. And if I go ahead and run that, in this instance, I'm not seeing anything to the screen, and that's mainly because it's just going to that file instead. So if I go ahead and kill it, so it gives me some basic information. And now if I go ahead and I take a look at the log file that was generated, which is this bottom one here, I can use -R, and then it goes ahead and it pops out all of that information that it was not showing before. And similarly, because the file that I had saved the Wireshark output in was a PCAP file, I can go ahead and snort -R users and then documents, and I can go ahead and I can read that PCAP file. And so that's very useful because it basically allows me then to run the files from different services in Snort as well, which is, I think, pretty neat. Now, if I want to go ahead and I want to use those rules that I created from earlier, I'm going to use -C, and then I'm going to go ahead and find the configuration file. Now, traditionally, those are stored in the etc directory, and they're typically stored as snort.conf. So I go, I forgot to initialize the interface. So if I do -I2, we go ahead and unfortunately, there we go. So it looks like I needed to give it the verbose setting. So we see that it's going through it, and we no longer get that warning telling us that something has gone wrong. So I go ahead and end it. And now I have a lot more information than what I was dealing with before. So it gives me some preprocessor statistics in terms of how long things were running. Um, there's FTP stuff. So we can see if there's anybody connected right now through FTP. And we can see all sorts of other information. Now, in terms of these configuration files, I've got one pulled up here. If you go to the Snort website, there should be a community configuration that you can go ahead and download right off the spot. One minor thing that you'll have to do, though, is that if you're on Windows, because the slash rules are the opposite of Linux, you're going to have to go through and fix that for all of the times that you are trying to access a different file. So that's pretty important, and you're going to have to find that. I haven't really modified anything in this other than to tell it to output everything to the screen for me. But as you can see, it's preparing us to have just a whole bunch of different rules. I tried to get the community rules to run, but I had some trouble with it. It didn't want to load. But I would, I guess, as a challenge to you folks, I would say go ahead and try and get that running so that we can start maybe dropping some of these packets. Because as we can see, even though we've got the configuration pile running, it gives us some pretty cool extra stats. But at the moment, it's not necessarily dropping anything. So that'll be pretty much everything that I have for Snort at the moment. Hopefully you got a good idea in terms of some of the basics that it can do in terms of watching the network packets come in, and then you can start to use some of these rules and configuration files to start applying different rules and filtering for different things. So the last tool that we're going to be taking a look at today is going to be Splunk. And Splunk is a full security information and event management system. It's used for real-time analysis for security alerts, and it has a GUI-based system that manages machine-generated big data. Since it's a paid platform, there are a very large number of different use cases that it's been built for, including advanced threat detection, fraud detection, incident investigation, and then cybersecurity incident response. So it's a very robust tool that is pretty widely used. So that'll pretty much cover it in terms of the 3 different tools that we were going to look at today. There are many more that we didn't cover today, so these aren't the end-all be-alls in terms of the cybersecurity world. There are tons of other open source ones, other ones that you need to pay for. But that's a pretty general overview. We may cover this more in depth in future practices, but this at the very least hopefully give you a good idea kind of that what's out there and maybe kind of what to expect.